Coming at you a little bit different time here on this holiday. Welcome in the Maize and Blue Reviews. Good afternoon, Michigan football. Dennis Fithian joining you a little bit after 3 o'clock. Normally here at 2, but because of the Michigan basketball game, a matinee against Ohio State because of MLK Junior Day, we pushed the show back a few minutes, and here we are, and we are ready to go. And there's lots to talk about when it comes to Michigan. There's always lots to talk about when it comes to Michigan, but considering what has transpired over the last week or two, it's like out of sight. I always look forward to hearing what you have to say, what you're dealing with, what you're looking at, all of that when it comes down to the Maize and Blue. And for me, I want to remind everybody that this new year, the time to join the Maize and Blue Review is today. And you do that by going to michigan.rivals.com with everything about to happen with the transfer portal, with Jim Harbaugh trying to stay sane, with everything there, with who's going in, who's coming out, NFL, all of that. We got you covered. Maize and Blue Review. Join today by going to michigan.rivals.com. Well, the championship honeymoon, is it over already? For some people, you would think it is. I'll give you my thoughts on that honeymoon. I will look to what's next for Michigan football, but we are going to start with the weekend celebration and, the parade that happened over the weekend. Now, I have to tell you, when I first saw that there was going to be a parade, and then I looked and saw what was being said about the weather, I thought they should postpone it. If they could postpone it a day, they could. Then you start looking at a day, and then the temperatures are even going to get colder. So they really had to do it Saturday or nothing, because by today, certainly tomorrow, and with a basketball game, players are going to be heading out, going to work out, heading to working out, for getting ready for the NFL, all that. So it had to be on Saturday, and I wasn't thinking that I was going to go to that, and then I ended up going. Wife, daughter were like, "This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Why don't we go down there?" And I decided, that I was going to be right with them and say, "Yeah, all right, let's do it." I got a picture of me down here at the parade over on the far right. You can see I was at the very end. State in Hoover. Hoover marked the end of the parade, and that was right where I was at. So I was right at the tail end of the parade. Got out there, but it was a pretty good time. I'd say pretty good. It was a good time. I say, if I was to say pretty, is because of the cold, but man, I dressed for it. The only thing that I could have done that would have even kept me warmer, maybe some ski goggles, and then a scarf right across. You can see, but everything else, man, I layered up, boots, and it was pretty good. I felt, I don't want to say I felt warm, but I didn't feel freezing cold the way it went. And it was Richard talking about the linemen with their without their shirts, cracking them up. Yeah, you get that. You get that at football games. You watch over the weekend. There's always a couple. It gets you on TV, and then for the linemen, it can make it where that it seems to be I don't want to say it's always linemen, but I don't know. It seems like a lot of the times it is. Here's somebody talking about Rod Moore staying. Yeah, so a lot of people, a lot of Michigan players are leaving, and a few staying, including Donovan Edwards and Rod Moore and Josiah Stewart. And so, yeah, that's good. There's the thing about, you get a championship, and I'm not used to it. You're not used to it either. You're not used to Michigan winning a national championship. So people, I think you got to give them a little bit of a break where, and especially if you're a little bit younger, like Michigan just won a national championship. You wake up the next day and you're like, what's going on with recruiting? What's going on with the transfer portal? The NIL's a joke. Let's fire the athletic director. He's a clown. He's like, somebody tells you like, wait a second, we just won the championship. You're like, I know, but I want to this because it's what you're used to doing. I mean, that's every day, but you're used to waking up and getting after it. Like, let's go, for this team. And I think that if Michigan would have, let's say, fallen short against Alabama, the conversation that I would be having with you today would be vastly different. Looking at the name him like this and looking at the transfer portal and lack of news there, I think you could have made the argument like Michigan's made the college football playoffs 3 years in a row. Let's beat Ohio State along with that and the Big Ten. Let's relax a little bit. I'd say, yeah, but this was supposed to be the year that they took another step. And so what happened is Michigan did take the next step. Winning the national championship changes everything for me in my perspective. Now, if you still want to, slam your hand down and, feeling like, you want to get after Ward Manuel or Jim Harbaugh for doing what he's doing in the NFL or players jump into the league. I mean, you can do that. It's a free country. We can all do those kind of things. But remember, I mean, it sounds pretty easy to do. And you think, wait a second, I know that. But you remind yourself that what the goal is about all of this. And it is the national championship. I do have to remind myself because I can go back to 1997. And I remember the honeymoon lasting to the first two games of the following year. Michigan played Notre Dame in 1998. They had Tom Brady at quarterback, and they got beat by Notre Dame. It's kind of like, okay, so maybe the honeymoon's over. The next game, they got trashed by Syracuse. Donovan McNabb ran all over them at the Big House. And by then, you could say, well, they won the national championship. The honeymoon was over. And so what I would tell you, like Michigan, who do they play next year? They play Fresno State and Texas. If Michigan loses to Texas next year in game number 2, that's where I would feel like, the honeymoon, kind of would feel like it's a little bit over then or wherever it's at. But, not right now, not like 2 days after, the celebration and the parade in Ann Arbor. Like, I do think there was a part, and I get this part because I was thinking it as well. There's a lot of people that were hoping that J.J. McCarthy was going to come back for his senior season. And there's a lot of people that are still hoping that Jim Harbaugh comes back. And those two things, we talked about this Friday. There were a lot of people that thought both of those things are going to happen. Now, I told everybody that I didn't think either of those things were going to happen, but whatever. I was hoping that I was going to be wrong about that. I still hope that I'm going to be wrong about Harbaugh. But it did give you, especially with everyone thinking that it seemingly was going to happen, if those two did come back, you do start thinking about what you just went through as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity being, hey, why Michigan will be the favorite next year if they have J.J. McCarthy. If they're running this thing back, they could go back-to-back. And if they're going back-to-back and Harbaugh signed for the next 10 years and they get McCarthy back, this could touch off a dynasty. So I do think there's a little bit of, you could be a little, you don't have to be all like, oh, doesn't matter. He left. Remember, championship. I think there could be a little, I don't even know what you'd say, a tinge. Would it be sadness, disappointment? Because you saw the possibility of a dynasty there. Yeah. I mean, like, so you're always, I guess you can always dream bigger. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, myself, I guess I'm going to have to play I'm the 53-year-old card. When Michigan won their last national championship, it didn't take long. I said the 2 games the next year, but it didn't take long into this new 21st century. And me being, working in sports talk radio all day, every day, where you're thinking about your own personal goals in sports. And it got to, and I like the Red Wings, and I like the Tigers, and I like the Pistons, and I love, I cheer for the Lions. But I'm not as big as Lion fans as all of my friends who are like just the uber most biggest Lion fans in the world. I'm so excited for them for last night. Last night's win was great. My point is on all of those, and I saw some championships, for all those stuff. The Lions, obviously, and what that would be like would be pretty cool. But early in the 2000s, I just said to myself, just give me, if I could pick one more championship. Don't you want championships every year? But you realize, you do realize that they are few and far between. If we just look at Detroit and we just look at Michigan, we got Michigan here. But before this, what was it? The Red Wings in 2008. That's a long time. Before that, you go back to 97 and 90, 2002, the Red Wings had a little bit of a dynasty there, but look at how long it's been. My point here is that you don't get them all the time, even though the Red Wings, you felt like you were going to do it. But my thing was, out of all the championships, and it's great, you'd like to win one every year, however, I would just want one more Michigan football championship. That's it. And if I could get that, I would be like, that's my only real wish. I wanted to see it. And so my wish came true last Monday. Michigan won that championship. It's not like I'm retiring from being a sports fan or retiring here from the Maize and Blue Review, or hey, that's it. Let's just hang up the coat and never have any interest. But I made it. I'm here. I did it. I don't know. So this is just fandom talking. What happens when you reach the summit of Mount Everest? You have made it to the very top of the mountain, and you enjoy the view, and then you get back down, and then somebody says, "Well, what's next for you?" And you're like, "I made it. I got to pick something else." But I don't know. At some point, I'll pick something else. I know that was rambling. That's how I'm feeling right now. Now, I'm thinking that other people are not going to feel the same as me, and that's fine. And that's where I think I'm going to get, now that I'm talking about this, that's where I'm going to get my drive again, from the people, and, like-minded people, and yet they'll see things a little bit different, and I'll get that drive back for something else. With that, let's look a little bit and check out what some of the people are saying. Richard's talking about him hearing something about JJ, got info that he'll be a first rounder. Well, if JJ was watching this show last Friday, I said that JJ wouldn't get out of the teens. So he could have been watching this show and said, you know what? That guy thinks I'm not getting out of teens. He's been around. He knows what he's talking about. So yeah. John talking about the best sports week for Michigan fans ever. It was. From, if you want to say, I'll go back to, let's just go back to the beginning of the month, because that started with Michigan, Alabama. And then the following week was the national championship. And now this week, you get a Lions victory at home for the first time in 32 years. I'll put all three of those together, the best 3 week for sure. That's it. I'm thinking what would rival it. I mentioned the Red Wings back in 2008. I do remember in 2008 and 2009, the Red Wings and the Pistons would be playing sometimes at the same time, and the Red Wings would be playing. I think I got this right. I would be down at the Joe Louis Arena watching the Red Wings and the Penguins play in the Stanley Cup final. In between periods, I would go up to a suite, and the Pistons would be taking on the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. I mean, so there's a lot that was, those things where it was rolling. And there used to be something when I worked in Detroit back in the early days, when you would get to April, they had a song, even they took submissions, April in the D. Well, you would have Tiger baseball starting up, and they were good back then. And then you had the Pistons, you had the Red Wings, and you had the NFL draft. And I'd put even the Michigan spring game. April in the D was out of sight. That's the time to be a sports fan. But these last 3 weeks, as John is talking about, it's as good as with a championship and a Rose Bowl win, and a college football playoff win and a Lions victory. Now you're talking. Account 22 is talking about another historic defense setting up for next year. Yeah, account 22, where you get Rod Moore coming back, you get Josiah Stewart. You like to see that. They lost Jalen Harrell, Braden McGregor, Chris Jenkins. Those are three pretty big time players. Michael Barrett, Junior Colson. So there's 5. Josh Wallace, there's 6 off of that defense. But it looks like both Page and Rod Moore coming back. So you're starting safeties. That's big. Of course, Will Johnson, best corner in the country. And that's a pretty big deal. Linebackers, you got to replace Colson. Remember, they did go into the transfer portal, and they got the linebacker out of Maryland, and he's a good one. So you do think about him and Houseman. I agree. I would start with next year's defense talking about Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant right there in the middle. And then they do bring some edges with, Harold gone, Josiah Stewart and Rod Moore, the 2 guys that were out there on the final play and made the play to stop Milroe in the Rose Bowl. So yeah, I would agree with that. The defense is looking really good here on paper, and that is something to get excited about. Account 22 is saying Jim is coming back. He has a smiley face. Now, you might be right. Jim Harbaugh, it's still, if you look at the Vegas odds, Vegas thinks he's coming back. He's minus money in terms of coming back to Michigan, which they think that he is coming back. He is interviewing with the Chargers today. This can be something that can drive you crazy. I can remember each of the last 2 years. I would even say 3 for me, although people don't like really going back to the 3 years. But the last 2, the deal with the Vikings, like he had both feet out the door, and he was, there was plans being made for a succession and everything else, and then he was back, and it was a big. And then there was last year and how that went. And look, however you feel about it, to me, it is going to become a bottom line. I don't care what Harbaugh's using in the media or his agent is using, or what the Michigan president might put out there, or what Ward Manuel or whatever fans have to say about everything else. The bottom line is just get Jim Harbaugh back. And if they get him back as the head coach, this thing and all that talk about the possibility of a dynasty in Michigan, the most important thing is your head coach. And Michigan having the best head coach in all of college football, I don't need to tell everybody, that's going to be a pretty big deal. So, yeah, if Jim Harbaugh comes back, I think it touches off for me another big celebration. Where I'm stopping when it comes down to this is listening, and there's nothing against, because I know a few of people that are close to Jim Harbaugh will be watching and listening to this, and I'll probably get some text. I'm not doing any bidding for Jim Harbaugh or putting any cover down for Jim Harbaugh while he's out there interviewing in the NFL and making it sound like, well, Michigan really needs to come to the table. Michigan needs to do more, blah, blah, blah. Maybe Michigan really does need to do more. Maybe Ward Manuel really needs to step up more with the contract. Or maybe Jim Harbaugh really just wants to go out there and see what the Raiders and Chargers are going to offer, and then he'll think really about taking that job. You have to decide that for yourself. But this part about, let's inject the athletic director in there, which is still stuff that's going on to this hour, It's just, for me, this is where it comes down. If Harbaugh really does, I'll try to cut this down to the bare essentials here. If Harbaugh really does want to come back to Michigan, and what's preventing him is the athletic director or them putting something about the investigation in, and they just quite haven't done that with the contract language. Instead of him saying something to some of his buddies that then is going to get leaked out through the Michigan side and everything, no, I'm not buying any of that from Harbaugh. If Harbaugh really wants that, he should come out and say it himself. That's the only way I'm believing it. And there's nothing against, I'm working for the Maize and Blue Review. There's nothing against Josh Henschke coming out and working his hundreds of sources and all of them like, yeah, Jim really wants to be here. Couple things in the no. I'm following what Jim Harbaugh said after the pandemic. He said, follow me by my actions. And I saw what he did 2 years ago with the Vikings, and it was a big relief when he said he was going to come back. But guess what he said? I'm happy here. I'm never going to do this again. And then he did it again. And then Michigan people were like, yeah, well, he was just doing that so he could get something in his contract, and that was Ward Manuel's fault. I'm not buying that. And I don't know, you want to buy it, go ahead. I mean, he's this great coach, and he's the greatest coach ever, and I hope that he's coming back and everything else, but I'm not going to sit around and, at his feet talking about, oh, well, last year, he did 2 interviews when he said he wasn't. I'm not going to sit around calling him a liar, but let's be honest about some of this. And now this time around, he is out today talking with the Chargers, and I got his side telling me, yeah, well, I don't know if Ward really wants him to be here or not. Oh, please with that. Please. I'm not running cover for him while he's out, and he's, he wants to do it. He's doing it. And he's the GOAT and everything else, but that's just where I'm standing. If you want to be a fan and you'll eat it up, and you need a bad guy and, Ward, he'll be the guy for you. Go at it. All right, that's all I have to say about that situation. When it comes down to Harbaugh, woo! Mary Ellen says it's a dynasty if Michigan continues to beat Ohio. Mary, you can make that argument with me, and I'm not going to tell you you're wrong about that. If Michigan, for the next 5 years, if they even win 3 out of 5, but let's say they win 4 out of 5 more against Ohio State, you're right. That's going to feel like a dynasty, regardless of what they do after beating Ohio State, regardless of what they do before that. So I'm with you on that. Let's see. I'm sure John said to Jim on the field at the end of the CFP back-to-back. I'm not sure. Richard saying Pistons almost had a 3-peat. They did. Count 22 didn't like my just one more. From 20 years ago, that was my thought. And Account 22 is like, nah, he wants to keep it going. He's using the next championship as what next? You're using the old John Falk, Account 22. What's your next best favorite thing in sports? The next championship. Don't ever let that leave you. So I get that part. I hear you. GA is excited about next year's Michigan defense. There's Count 22 saying that Jim doesn't strike him as a California person. Yeah, I know you put ha there at the end, but he played pro football in college. I mean, he played pro football in California. He coached at San Diego. He coached at the Raiders. He's played for the Chargers. Oh yeah, Stanford. I mean, so I guess you're just joking around. So that's it. I don't know. Somebody was telling me, hey, if there was an opening in Kansas City, I would believe it because his wife's from Kansas City. I thought his wife was from California. So, there you go. There's always something. Daniel saying that we're going to need a whole ass O line craziness. Yeah. The thing about this year all along, the defense could be good, and Michigan's needs offensive line. They also need a quarterback, and they really have a treacherous schedule. If this year's team, can we do this? If this year's team was playing next year's schedule, I don't think they would go undefeated. Now, would they have a chance to win a 12th? It's so different. I mean, like playing that game, but I'm playing it here. This year's Michigan team, great defense, J.J. McCarthy, Blake Corum, go through the whole thing. They won the national championship 15-0. If they were going to next year's schedule, where they're playing, Texas, and here comes USC, and all there's the the schedule. They would lose a couple, but then they have to get into a 12-team playoff. They'd be in the mix. Hell, I was thinking that if J.J. McCarthy did what I didn't think he was going to do and decided that he was going to come back, that that Michigan would be one of the favorites. They would be one of the favorites. They would have been one of the favorites to win the national championship next year and go back to back. And no, I'm not talking about the cost of living. 125 million just goes a long way, but it doesn't go. you know, here's a piece of feedback from Andres, who says Jim doesn't shy away from adversity or a challenge. That's why he stayed before, and that's probably why he might leave now. Sounds like Andres at least thinking there's a chance. Mr. CEO saying you got to move on from Jim. Thanks for everything, but continuity is needed. Yeah, I'm not going that far, but as much as I'm over here, it's just screaming and yelling and everything else about January Jim and the NFL. Like, if he comes through this, if he, he's out there with the Chargers and all these dudes are, talking about 110 full power and all this, and then the Raiders come back and they even give him a better deal than they gave John Gruden, which was 10 years and 100 million, and then the Cowboys get in the mix. That's never going to happen. I can't see that. But as another team gets into the mix and they start talking about 130, if in 2 weeks' time Harbaugh is back and signs a contract, then that's what is best for Michigan football. It's not we got to move on from Jim. And this whole thing that actually is not continuity. Continuity is, it's not perfect. January Jim is not perfect. But he needs what they saying, Coming to America to Eddie Murphy. He needs to sow his royal oats. Is that what Eddie Murphy was doing? He needs to check everything out over there. There's a possibility that he just wants to go out there in San Diego now that he's where he's at. Like when he was sitting in Minnesota, he's like, okay, I'm ready to win all this. And then they were like, hey, what are you going to do for us? And he's like, this is the way it could have, ended up falling apart. And he's like, no, you guys are supposed to be recruiting me, not me recruiting you. Now, did I say San Diego? LA is going to be rolling out the red carpet for him. They're going to have crowns. They're going to be feeding him grapes. They're going to be, have the palm trees and you say, you're our king. Here's the riches. You can have everything, anything that you want. It is all there. And, Jim's going to be like, I want a little bit more even than that. And maybe they'll give it to him. And then he'll be like, let me get back to you because I'm going to go out to the Raiders. And then maybe the Raiders will be like, we offered Gruden 100 million. Here's 150 million. I don't know. And then Jim's just going to be sitting back there like 150 million, and I can pick all the players too. I can be the GM and the coach, and you're going to give me $150 million. Okay, I'm going to go back to Ann Arbor and mow the lawn and get some milk and, mull it over. And then he'll sit back there and he'll tell his wife and him, his dad lives a couple doors down. His kids will be out there. He's like, we all love being in here and everything, but I gotta, you know, should we stay here? My legacy is cemented. Everybody's gonna love you guys anyways, or should I bounce for 125 million? California's not that bad. Plus, if it's real cold, the kids will be like, "Let's go." You could keep a house here. I would guess. I know, it's not cheap, and it's not cheap in Cali. It's not cheap in Ann Arbor either. But again, 125 million in a private plane, it go a long way. I am rambling now. Jason says as long as we get decent quarterback play, we'll be all right. Mr. CEO says this is what kills recruiting classes. Yeah, it doesn't help. I mean, how am I going to argue that? They're not really all that big of a deal, Chargers are cheap, maybe. Have we seen anything from Ward Manuel contract wise? I found that whole thing odd. I don't know why you find it odd. I mean, Ward had went through his Michigan media contacts and said, "Look, we've got a contract for him. He just needs to sign it." The only part that he's not signing, we're giving him 125 million. Michigan said they're going to give him 125 million through like the Michigan media. But and he said it's done. The only thing Jim needs to do is sign it, but he can't go to the NFL. That's what he needs to sign. And Jim's like, "Oh, well, that's the part I'm not signing." That's been the holdup the whole long for what he's today is the holdup. Jim did not sign that contract because he wanted to hear from these NFL teams. Now, that doesn't make it a sure thing that he's going to go to the NFL. But there's nothing odd about it. Now, I think Ward, he was having fun at the championship ceremony on Saturday, talking about I got a contract in my pocket. But, Jim wants to hear what the NFL teams have to say to him. I don't know what it's like, college football, you're a hero, millions of dollars in the NFL. And now, I got to believe because, in 2020, the same thing was going out there. Remember, Jim had to take half the people still talking about he was treated so poorly. He took a haircut. They slashed his salary in half. He couldn't get a job. No NFL teams were calling him. He was sitting out there. Now, I thought that the Bears were going to fire their head coach, and I think that they would have been interested. This is back in 2020, but nobody was interested. Harbaugh didn't have an agent. He wasn't working the phones. He was just expecting guys to pick up the phone and woo him coming off of a pandemic season because of what he'd done in the past. And I still thought that some team would do it. I thought there had been a team that had been like, "Hey, this guy's pretty good. Let's go for him." But they didn't. And that's when, he came back and beat Ohio State. Then the Vikings were interested, that's for sure. And then that fell apart. It still wasn't like, "Jim, you're the greatest of all time. Here's all the money and all the power." They wanted, and then, that broke down. But now he's just going to sit there and they're just going to tell him how great he is. And they're going to say, "I don't know. We'll start at 100. What else do you want? You want 110? You want 120? You want 130? You want what's he want?" Everybody always says, a lot of people say this to me. Jim's not about the money. The power, money. Here's all the power and here's all the money. That's what they're going to be doing over the next couple of days. And maybe he just wants to have all of that. So he can go back and any little last item in the contract that was some kind of sticking point, he can be like, "Yeah, guys, why don't you go ahead and add another zero over there," or whatever. I mean, there's some thought that there's some contract protection language in case something else comes up with the NCAA. Do I really think that Michigan is, holding some kind of line on the contract? Or that Ward Manuel really doesn't want him to come back after what he's just done for the last 3 years? I mean, I can't my brain can't wrap around, Ward Manuel trying to run some kind of, okey doke on him the other way and doesn't want him to go to the NFL, even though he said all along he wants him. And even though, apparently there's this kind of, because, because why? He thinks he's Dave Brandon 2.0 or something. He wants more power. Ward Manuel gets Jim Harbaugh signed. Ward Manuel can go play golf junkets for the next 5 years and not worry about anything. You just wake up every day and feel like, what's the weather? When am I planning my next golf trip? Hey, we got the soccer coach. Tell the soccer coach, whatever. Have somebody else deal with the soccer coach. Let's go. Joel. Lots of trolls on this chat. Anybody who knows Jim knows he loves his family at home at Michigan and loves winning at the highest level. That's why he has stated he wants to win a Super Bowl. Yeah, I think all that's true. I haven't seen any trolls today. What are they? Is anybody saying that's a troll? You know, he, he's operating like he usually does. Amy talking. Yeah, nobody's trolling. That's just where it's at right now. That's where I am. So the part about next year, maybe there's some other, podcasts that are like really like, examining the too deep right now. I really have to know about Harbaugh before I start talking about what I think for next year. Now, if Harbaugh comes back, like Harbaugh pushed the spring game back a month, I feel like pushing all that back a month too. Before I start grinding it out on the transfer portal, let's see who the next guys they bring in. I really have to know about the head coach. If Jim Harbaugh is not coming back next year, and Michigan, and then now they got to go into the transfer portal with, Sharon Moore, and maybe they'll lose some more of their coach. I mean, we don't even know that. I was looking at some podcast today. The guy was breaking down the Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State schedules for next year. And I'm like, that sounds great. I mean, I love college football as much as anybody, but, there's still a lot of moving parts. And for Michigan, the biggest moving part is out in LA right now, eating grapes and getting his feet massaged by the Chargers. Let's see what comes of that before he goes out to Vegas and what he wants to do out there. I've got to know what's going on there before I start talking about, I think they can win 10 games next year. They got to have an incredibly tough schedule. I know that, but it's a 12-team playoff. If you had to ask me, do I think Michigan's going to make the playoffs next year? I would say yes. I would, because I'm thinking that, even this, Harbaugh could go, and like, I've made my prediction, but I'm going to sit here every day and say, but if Jim Harbaugh comes back, I think Michigan will make the playoffs next year. So I think he'll work the transfer portal with an enthusiasm that he brings with his staff. I don't know if it'll be unknown to mankind, but he'll be working the transfer portal. And I think he'll put a pretty good team out there. Quarterback's going to be pretty important. So that's where I'm sitting. That's what's going on. All right. I will be back on Wednesday. Everybody have a great rest of your holiday. And we'll see you then. Oh, wait a second. And we'll see you then.